Hello, YouTube. Lovell Hawes, prior enlisted Marine, history buff, and just somebody who does a lot of research. And this one is kind of an interesting thought process. It's about the Strategic Oil Reserve. The Strategic Oil Reserve was actually initiated during the Cold War, so that way, no matter what happens to our oil supplies, we would actually be able to conduct warfare operations in the it was specifically made for if the Cold War had turned hot, as an open conflict had actually happened between the East Bloc and the West Bloc, and actually had the Soviet Union and its allies, and part of the Warsaw Pact, going against us and our NATO allies, probably in Eastern Europe, possibly in a place like Alaska, and in other places around the world. And it would have made it so that way, no matter what happened to our oil supply, we would have still been able to conduct warfare operations. After all, tanks, jeeps, planes, helicopters, they all need petroleum products either for maintenance purposes, such as lubricants, or for direct fuel purposes in order to conduct these operations. And we would have needed a lot of it. The idea being that we would have had a couple months' supply, so even if the supply was disrupted, that we could actually still continue to fight despite whatever caused the disruption. Okay, so this leads to a question that I've got for myself. Why can't we reinterpret what the meaning of the Strategic Oil Reserve is? And here's where I'm going with this. Imagine if instead of it only had, say, a couple months worth of oil supply in it, that it had, say, 2 years. And in that point, the Strategic Oil Reserve would have 2 years and double our refinery capacity, and make it so that way, okay, those refineries are operating at roughly 50%, or some of them are just don't keep the lights off and nobody's home, just enough for people to maintain the maintenance. And then somebody like, well, prime example, Russia starts acting a fool. Well, Russia, half its economy is based on oil. I've already covered this in previous videos. And so that means high oil prices good for Russian economy. It is very good for Russian ruble. Okay? Now, well, check the gas prices. They aren't exactly low now, are they? So, it makes a barrel of oil more profitable. So, what if when the Russians were building up, we had actually intentionally caused what is called a glut, an oversupply of oil in the market that artificially deflates the price. So, say it would have been, say, $10 a barrel is what we aimed for, using the Strategic Oil Reserve to do that. The Russian economy would suffer horribly because, again, half their economy is based on oil, high oil prices, good for their economy. Well, if high oil prices good for Russian economy at over $100 a barrel, what would say $10 a barrel, a tenth of the price due to the Russian economy? Probably collapse it. It would probably cause a crash of unbelievable proportions in the Russian economy. And if you don't have a robust economy, you can't maintain a military assault. And therefore, it would actually make it so that way them, the Iranians, and a few others that don't like us too much, Venezuela being another one of them, would definitely take notice. And they would definitely want to play by our rules because they know that we'll do it again. There's no loss of blood. There's actually an increase in treasure because of the fact that we can actually export all of that to, say, our allies. Germany, for example, uses oil a lot. And Germany could actually have American oil coming in instead of worrying about whether or not the Russians are going to cut off Nord Stream 2. So, Germany could say, "Nine, this is not good for you, Russia." Mm-mm. They could actually tell the Russians no, a little better than they have been. The Iranians, on the other hand, would be less likely to cut off the Strait of Hormuz because we could do it again with them. They'd be less likely to attack the Iraqis, they'd be less likely to cause any trouble with the Saudi Arabians, and they'd be more likely to listen to what we have to say when it comes to their nuclear program. But if we say, cut that crap out, they'd be like, okay. I was like, if anybody who's an oil producer actually does something we don't like, we cause a glut until they stop. And because OPEC would, as a whole would be a part of that. It's like Saudi Arabia would not want us to cause a glut, and Russia's also an OPEC country. That's two of them, because Saudi Arabia go, yo, Russia, stop it. We like having money. The Kuwaitis would say the same thing, as would the Iraqis, the United Arab Emirates. Venezuela would say it as well. Iran would probably be like, Russia, stop doing that. It would create quite a few countries that would not be very happy with Russia as a whole. So, why can't we reinterpret the use of the Strategic Oil Reserve like this? And it also happens to fall in line with something that I personally like. It is called, Sun Tzu described it in The Art of War as supreme excellence. He described supreme excellence as being able to break the enemy's resistance without fighting. That would have involved nobody dying on the Russian or Ukrainian side had we had this in place before Russia decided to go into Ukraine. All we would have needed to do was, while they were building up, cause the glut in the first place and crash their economy and say, go back to Moscow, Vlad. So, with that being said, we can still do this. There is enough oil in Texas alone to suit our country's needs for 50 years. That doesn't count the Gulf of Mexico. That doesn't count Pennsylvania. That doesn't count what has been discovered off the coast of Virginia. That doesn't count ANWR or any of the other oil reserves that are available at our disposal. And in the process, I would also, where applicable, actually have pipelines put in place. As like it would seem suitable to me to send a pipeline up through Canada to Greenland to Iceland and then on through to say England. It would be a very ambitious project, and or Ireland, England, and then maybe on to France. It would be a very ambitious project, but it would actually make it so that way our allies could actually tell the Russians, nah, we're not going to listen to you. And at the same time, the Russians would be like, oh crap, because they don't have a monopoly on European oil anymore. And it's like they never really did have it because the British had found oil in the Falklands, but the Falklands is about 8,000 miles away from England itself. It is not exactly around the corner, and it would still take quite some doing to get it from England for England to us. And the pipeline is still the best way to do that, rather than having a whole convoys of tankers going over there. But it would actually remove the strategic importance of having those tankers going over there. Therefore, even if an open warfare did happen, the Russians couldn't, for example, happen to intercept some of our tankers in the middle of the Atlantic and torpedo them and hope to actually have an immediate impact on the war effort. They'd have to target other things as well. And it would actually, in those other things, are fixed positions. We know where they are. Greenland doesn't move. Or does Iceland. Or if we could, run it straight across the bottom of the Atlantic. Although it'd be kind of interesting if it went past, say, the Titanic. Yeah, that'd be rather interesting if it went anywhere near Newfoundland. So yeah, I'm not sure if those engineering challenges can be overcome. It'd be rather interesting if they could. I would really love to see that. But at the same time, even if it's just taking the Americas out of the equation, Canada, the United States, Mexico. Keep on going down and down and down until you reach Panama. Keep going down until you reach Brazil and Argentina. And it's like, at that point, it was like taking those countries out of the equation makes it so that way it's harder for Russia to compete in the market. It makes it harder for Venezuela to compete with you in the market. It makes it harder for Iran to compete with you in the market if you take two continents out of the equation. And it's like at the same time, nothing's stopping the tankers from flowing westward across the Pacific to Japan, for example, or Australia. The Japanese haven't had a reason to cut off the Coral Sea since World War II, and they failed back then. So, at the same time, there's actually, like I said, we can actually make it so that way we dictate the pace a little bit here. If Russia wants to fight, they're gonna have to do it on a bad economy, where they're just gonna run out of money and have to go home bankrupt. And they're probably gonna do that anyway. But look how many Ukrainian lives were lost in the meantime. Look how many Russian lives were lost. Look how there was actually a prior enlisted Marine who did go over there, who fought with the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, who died for Ukrainian sovereignty. He would not be dead right now, if not for the fact that we already had this in position. So, when it comes down to it, why can't we reinterpret the use of the Strategic Oil Reserve as such? So, instead of having just a few 100 million barrels of oil, we have billions, and we use it to prevent war. We cause a glut until you start playing by our rules. We crash your economy. And conversely, we can do the same thing for countries that aren't oil producers. As like, say the Congo or Sierra Leone starts up with issues again. We can stop supplying them. We can actually use what's called an oil embargo. And it would actually make things harder for them, although they don't depend on it nearly as much as, say, Russia does. Or, say, China, for example, has issues. We cut them off. If we're dictating the pace like that, then the Chinese, for example, would stop what they're doing with the Uyghur Muslims, would stop with the disputed territory that is Vladivostok, would stop with the disputed territory that they have with India, would stop disputing territory with the Japanese with the Ryukyu Islands, would stop disputing territory with just about everybody in the form of the South China Sea, and would probably cut that crap out with Taiwan. 6 things that we need to address with China. Possibly more, after all. Nobody likes to see a sweatshop. Yeah, it's like things like an embargo would definitely have their attention, because it's like we could look at China and go, hey, look, we can embargo you even more. We can cut off all trade with you, and it would hurt you big time. Cut all of these things out, and then we'll talk. So, toward that particular end, the Strategic Oil Reserve, I believe, should be adjusted, as I've just pointed out, where we can actually use it to prevent war. A lot of people I've heard over the years on the other side of the political argument, again, I'm conservative here, have actually said no blood for money or no blood for oil. Well, how about this? We use oil to prevent blood, period. So, I'll leave you with that particular one. And I'm going to be sharing this with everyone because I don't think this is too big of a partisan issue. Because it can be used to actually set up the research and development necessary to set up, say, fusion technology, which I believe is the future towards actually taking us off of oil dependency pretty much altogether. Although you have to account for some of the other materials, like, say, plastic bags or, say, baby aspirins. You have to rework them a little bit, but I think that's relatively small potatoes compared to that. But I've been Lovell. You guys have been awesome, and I hope you have a great day.